Until the accusation is answered, she will not stand beside me as Luna. The words fell from Alpha King Adrian Cole's mouth like winter settling over a field, silent at first, then everywhere. Claire Bennet stood beneath the silver arch of the great hall, her hand still raised from the moment the moon ring had been placed on her finger. Hundreds of candles burned in crystal bowls along the black stone walls. Their gold light shimmered over the polished floor, the banners of the northern packs, the jeweled gowns of noblewomen, and the dark formal coats of alpha lords who had come to witness the sacred moon bond. A few heartbeats earlier, the hall had been warm with music and applause. Now no one moved. No one breathed loudly enough to disturb the silence. Claire looked down at the ring. It was a simple band of pale silver, carved with two small crescent moons touching at their points. It had warmed the instant Adrian placed it on her hand. Not hot. Not painful. Just warm, like the first cup of tea after a long winter walk. The elders had called it a blessing. The court had called it impossible. A healer from Frost Hollow, a woman with no noble blood, had been chosen by the old moon magic to stand beside the most powerful Alpha King in the kingdom. Claire had tried not to believe the whispers. She had told herself that the way Adrian looked at her during the ceremony meant more than the court's judgment. He had held her gaze as the silver light rose around them. He had promised, before the ancient altar in every pack in the northern territories, that he would honor the bond. But now Chancellor Victor Hale stood beside the throne with a sealed letter in his hand, his gray eyes lowered in practiced sorrow. "The evidence came from the Southern Archives," Victor said softly. "Claire Bennet's father was named in records connected to those who once betrayed the crown." Claire could still hear the paper crackle when Adrian unfolded it. She could still see the hesitation that had crossed his face before he looked at her. He had not called her a traitor. That almost made it worse. He had simply looked uncertain. And uncertainty, in a room full of people eager to see her fall, had become its own kind of cruelty. Lady Serena Vale stood near the front of the court in a gown the color of deep wine. Her face remained perfectly composed, but Claire saw the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. Serena had spent the past month telling everyone who would listen that a king needed a queen with a pedigree, not a village healer who smelled of rosemary and snow. Claire had ignored her. Tonight she understood that ignoring poison did not make it disappear. Adrian descended one step from the raised platform. His black formal coat caught the candlelight, and the silver wolf clasp at his collar looked colder than the moon ring on her hand. "Claire," he said low enough that only those nearest could hear, "until I know the truth, I cannot ask the kingdom to accept this bond." Claire lifted her eyes to his. They were silver, the same eyes that had found her across the crowded hall during the ceremony. The same eyes that had made her believe, for one dangerous hour, that she had finally found a place where she would not have to prove her worth. "Do you believe I would betray you?" she asked. The question was quiet. It did not need to be louder. Adrian did not answer. His silence spread through the hall, wider than any accusation. Claire felt the warmth leave the ring. She did not cry. She would not give Victor, Serena, or the court the comfort of watching her break. Instead, she slid the moon ring from her finger. The silver band resisted for the briefest moment, then loosened. Its light faded in her palm. Claire held it out to Adrian, her hand steady even though her heart was not. "Then you do not deserve the vow it gave us." For a moment, Adrian did not take the ring. He looked at it resting in Claire's open palm, small and pale beneath the great hall's golden light, and something unguarded crossed his face. Regret, perhaps. Or fear. But neither of those things could undo the silence that had come before. Around them, the court remained perfectly still. The musicians had lowered their instruments. The elders stood beneath the carved moon pillars with their heads bowed, their ceremonial robes bright against the dark marble floor. Even the servants near the high doors seemed afraid to breathe. Claire felt every eye upon her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had dared to refuse the place they had been so eager to take from her. Chancellor Victor Hale watched from beside the throne, his expression arranged into solemn concern. Lady Serena Vale stood a few feet behind him, one jeweled hand folded over the other, her deep red gown catching the candlelight. She looked almost sympathetic. That was what made Claire's stomach turn. Sympathy was easier to wear than triumph. "Claire," Adrian said again, and this time his voice was softer. "I am trying to protect the kingdom." Claire's fingers closed slightly around the moon ring. "From me?" The question landed harder than she intended. Adrian's jaw tightened. He looked past her for half a second, toward Victor and the sealed letter that had changed the entire room. When he looked back, his silver eyes held the same uncertainty that had broken something inside her. "From what I do not yet understand," he said. Claire nodded once. She had spent years understanding things other people refused to see. She knew when a fever would turn dangerous. She knew when a child's cough came from cold air instead of sickness. She knew when an old wound had begun to heal badly beneath a bandage. And now she understood this too. Adrian was not calling her guilty. He was simply willing to let everyone else think she might be. The difference did not make the pain smaller. "You asked the kingdom to watch you doubt me," Claire said. Her voice remained calm, though every word felt like it had been pulled from somewhere deep in her chest. "You did not protect the kingdom tonight. You protected yourself from having to stand beside someone the court already decided was beneath you." A ripple moved through the nobles, too quiet to be called a whisper. Victor's face remained smooth, but Serena's smile disappeared. Adrian stepped down from the platform until only a few feet separated him from Claire. He looked as though he wanted to say something that would make it right. Claire almost wished he would not try. Some silences could not be repaired with beautiful words. "I never believed you were beneath me," he said. "Then why did you make me stand there alone?" Adrian did not answer. That was answer enough. Claire looked at the moon ring one final time. Earlier that evening, it had felt like a promise. Now it felt like proof of a promise broken before the night had even ended. She placed it into Adrian's hand. His fingers closed around it slowly, as if the silver had become too heavy to hold. The instant it left her palm, every candle in the great hall dimmed. A low shiver passed through the old stone beneath their feet. The moon crest above the throne flickered once, then went dark. Several elders gasped. Victor took a careful step forward. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice filled with false urgency, "the wards are responding. This is precisely why the bond must be suspended until we know what she has brought into this court." Claire turned toward him. For the first time that night, her fear gave way to something clearer. "I brought nothing into this court," she said. "But someone brought a lie." Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Adrian looked from Claire to the letter in Victor's hand, and doubt finally began to touch his face. But it was too late for Claire to wait for him to find courage. She lifted her chin, gathered the edge of her white ceremonial cloak, and walked toward the great doors. No one moved to stop her. Not the elders. Not the guards. Not even the Alpha King whose ring she had just returned. Behind her, the hall remained silent until she reached the doors. Then Adrian called her name. Claire paused, but she did not turn around. Claire paused at the great doors, but she did not turn around. Behind her, the silence of the court pressed against her back like a cold hand. She could feel Adrian standing in the center of the great hall, the moon ring closed inside his palm, the weight of a kingdom and a mistake resting between them. "Claire," he said again. This time there was no command in his voice. No royal authority. Only her name. She closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them to the dark corridor ahead. The tall doors had already been pulled open by two stunned attendants, revealing the long marble passage that led toward the palace's eastern wing. Beyond the narrow windows, snow drifted across the courtyard in quiet white spirals. "What could you possibly say now?" Claire asked. Her voice carried back into the hall, clear enough for every noble and elder to hear. Adrian did not answer immediately. She hated that part of her still waited for him to find the right words. She hated that some small piece of her heart still remembered his hand around hers at the altar, his silver eyes softened by moonlight, the promise in his voice when he had told her she would never stand alone again. Then she remembered him looking at Victor's letter. She remembered the court watching him hesitate. "I should have asked you in private," Adrian said at last. "I should have trusted you before I trusted a document placed in front of me." Claire's fingers tightened around the edge of her ceremonial cloak. It was not enough. Maybe one day it would matter that he understood. Tonight, it only proved that he had understood too late. "You should have stood beside me," she said. "That is all." She stepped through the doors before he could answer. The attendants closed them behind her, gently at first, then fully, until the great hall disappeared from sight. The sound of the latch settling into place made her chest ache more than she expected. Claire walked quickly down the corridor. Her white cloak trailed behind her over the polished stone, bright and out of place against the black walls. She passed painted portraits of former Lunas, women with jeweled crowns and calm expressions, each one framed beneath the silver crescent of the royal house. For the first time, Claire did not wonder what it would have felt like to stand among them. She only wondered how many of them had been taught to smile through disappointment because everyone around them called it duty. At the end of the corridor, she reached the small guest chamber that had been prepared for her before the ceremony. The door was unlocked. Inside, the fire had burned low, and the wedding flowers arranged on the table had begun to droop in their crystal vase. White moon lilies. Adrian had chosen them because she once told him they grew wild near Frost Hollow. The memory almost stopped her. Almost. Claire crossed the room and opened the cedar travel trunk at the foot of the bed. She did not take the gowns the court had sent her. She did not take the pearl combs, the silver slippers, or the embroidered cloak marked with the royal crest. Instead, she found the plain brown satchel she had arrived with 3 weeks earlier. Inside were 2 simple dresses, a worn notebook filled with healing recipes, a small jar of dried rosemary, and the green scarf her mother had given her before she left Frost Hollow. Those things fit in her hands. Those things still felt like hers. When Claire tied the satchel closed, someone knocked softly on the door. Her body went still. "Claire," Adrian said from the hallway. "May I come in?" She looked at the door for a long moment. Then she walked past it, opened the narrow window, and stared out at the falling snow. "No," she said. The word came quietly, but it did not shake. Outside she heard no anger. No order. Only a long pause. "Then I will not come in," Adrian replied. Claire rested her hand against the cold glass. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, the road to Frost Hollow disappeared beneath the snow. By dawn, she would be on it. And for the first time since the moon ring had chosen her, Claire understood that leaving was not the same as losing. By dawn, the snow had softened the edges of Blackwood Citadel, until the palace looked less like a fortress and more like a place someone had forgotten to wake. Claire stood in the guest chamber beside her packed brown satchel, watching pale morning light spread across the floorboards. The white ceremonial cloak still lay folded over the chair where she had left it. She did not touch it. It belonged to a knight that had promised her a crown, then asked her to carry the shame of someone else's fear. A quiet knock came at the door. Claire did not answer. After a moment, an older maid stepped inside with a wool traveling cloak draped over one arm. It was dark green, lined with soft gray fleece, plain enough that no one would mistake it for royal clothing. "The king asked that this be offered," the woman said carefully. "He said you are free to refuse it." Claire looked at the cloak. "Did he send guards?" The maid shook her head. "No, miss. He said no one would follow you unless you asked." Something tightened in Claire's chest. Adrian had heard her, at least. He had not sent soldiers to escort her like a prisoner. He had not placed anyone outside the door to make leaving impossible. But understanding the boundary after he had crossed it did not erase the hurt. Claire accepted the cloak because the road to Frost Hollow was long and the winter wind was unforgiving, not because she wanted anything from him. She fastened it at her throat, lifted her satchel, and walked through the quiet eastern corridor. The palace felt different in daylight. The banners still hung from the walls. The silver wolf crest still watched from above every archway. Yet the place no longer seemed grand. It seemed hollow, filled with too many rooms where people had learned to confuse silence with loyalty. A pair of servants stepped aside as Claire passed. They lowered their eyes, but she heard the whisper that followed her. "She is leaving." Claire kept walking. At the base of the grand staircase, the front doors stood open to a courtyard covered in fresh snow. A black carriage waited near the gate, its horses already harnessed, steam rising from their breath in the cold air. Claire stopped at the top step. Adrian stood beside the carriage alone. He wore no crown and no formal coat, only a dark wool jacket dusted with snow. His silver eyes found hers, but he did not approach. He did not ask her to stay. For a few seconds, they faced each other across the white courtyard, with all the things either of them could repair standing between them. "The road east is clear for about 10 miles, Adrian said. His voice carried through the cold morning air. "After that, the snowfall may get heavier." Claire descended the steps slowly. "You checked the road for me? I had scouts confirm it. You still think you are responsible for every danger around me?" Adrian's expression shifted with pain, but he did not argue. "No," he said. "I think I failed to stand beside you when it mattered." Claire reached the carriage and set her satchel on the seat. Snow gathered along the edges of her dark green cloak. She wanted to be angry enough that his regret meant nothing. But he looked tired in a way she had never seen before, as if the palace had taken something from him too. That did not make them equal. It did not make the night disappear. "Do not come after me," she said. Adrian lowered his gaze for a moment, then looked back at her. "I will not." Claire climbed into the carriage. As the driver gathered the reins, a deep sound rolled through the citadel behind them. Not thunder. Not a bell. The old moon wards along the palace walls flickered once, then dimmed beneath the snow. Adrian turned toward the darkening silver crest above the gate. Claire followed his gaze, and for the first time, she understood that returning the moon ring had not only ended a promise. It had awakened a consequence either of them could ignore. The carriage rolled through the open gates of Blackwood Citadel, and Claire did not look back until the palace had become a dark shape behind the falling snow. The road east stretched ahead in two narrow tracks between pine-covered hills, white and quiet beneath the early morning sky. Inside the carriage, the air smelled of cold leather, cedar wood, and the rosemary jar tucked safely in her satchel. Claire held the green scarf her mother had given her across her lap, and watched the world pass through the frost-rimmed window. Every mile placed more distance between her and the great hall, the silent court, the moon ring fading in Adrian's hand. She told herself that distance was enough. She told herself that if she reached Frost Hollow before nightfall, she could return to the life she understood. There would be patients with winter coughs, children with scraped knees, older neighbors who needed warming tea and someone to listen when the evenings became too long. There would be herbs to sort, floors to sweep, and a clinic that smelled of chamomile, pine resin, and clean linen. It would not be a royal life. It would not be a life anyone would write songs about. But it would be hers. By late afternoon, the snowfall grew heavier. The driver pulled the horses beneath the shelter of a roadside inn, a low stone building with a sloped roof and smoke curling from its chimney. Claire stepped down from the carriage, her boots sinking into several inches of fresh snow. The cold bit at her cheeks, sharp and honest. She welcomed it. Inside, the innkeeper recognized her only as a tired traveler. He offered her a small room near the kitchen and a bowl of vegetable stew. No one stared at her hands. No one asked whether she was worthy of a king. No one whispered when she crossed the room. Claire sat near the window with the stew warming her palms and listened to the soft murmur of strangers talking about weather, roads, and the price of firewood. For the first time since the ceremony, her breathing began to slow. Then the candles along the inn wall flickered. Claire looked up. The flames bent toward the north, as though a wind had passed through the sealed room. At the same time, a pale silver glow appeared beneath the skin of her left palm. Not the moon ring. The ring was gone. This was something else. A thin crescent of light, faint but unmistakable, curved across her hand where the band had rested only hours before. Claire covered it quickly with her other palm. Her heart began to beat harder. Across the room, an old traveler by the fireplace noticed the light before it disappeared. His face went pale beneath his gray beard. "Moon wards," he murmured to no one in particular. "They are failing again." The inn grew quiet. A woman near the counter asked what that meant. The old traveler looked toward the northern road, toward Blackwood Citadel hidden beyond miles of snow. "It means the old magic is waking," he said. Claire lowered her eyes to her covered hand. She thought of Adrian standing alone by the palace gate. She thought of the ward crest dimming above him. She wanted to believe it was no longer her problem. She wanted to believe that returning the moon ring had cut every thread between them. But when the silver crescent warmed against her palm, one thought rose inside her with terrifying clarity. The bond had not ended. It had only changed. 3 winters later, Claire Bennet had learned that a broken vow could still leave a mark. Frost Hollow was small enough that everyone knew which chimney smoked first in the morning, and which kitchen made the best bread on market days. Her clinic stood at the end of Maple Street, a narrow white building with blue shutters, 2 flower boxes waiting patiently beneath the snow, and a hand-painted sign that read Bennet Healing House. By sunrise, the front room already smelled of steeping mint, clean linen, and cedarwood from the stove. Claire moved from patient to patient with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her chestnut hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck. She checked the temperature of a little boy with a winter cough, wrapped a warm compress around an old man's aching wrist, and measured dried fever leaf into small paper packets for a mother with 3 restless children. No one called her Luna here. No one lowered their voice when she entered a room. To the people of Frost Hollow, she was Claire, the woman who stayed late when storms trapped travelers on the road and who never let anyone leave without a warm drink when the weather turned cruel. It was enough. More than enough, she reminded herself whenever memory tried to pull her north. The silver crescent had never vanished from her palm. At first, it appeared only under moonlight, faint as frost on glass. Then it began to glow whenever the royal wards trembled somewhere beyond the mountains. Claire had stopped asking why. Some questions did not need answers to keep hurting. She simply covered the mark with a soft leather glove whenever patients came through the door and continued with her work. That afternoon, snow began again, drifting quietly past the windows in wide white spirals. Claire was placing fresh jars of rosemary on the shelf when the clinic bell rang. She turned, expecting another neighbor. Instead, a young messenger stood in the doorway, his dark cloak powdered with snow and the silver wolf crest of Blackwood Citadel pinned at his collar. The sight of it made the room go still. Claire did not move at first. The messenger removed his gloves and bowed his head. "Miss Bennet," he said, careful and formal. "I was told to find you only if the crescent returned." Claire looked down before she could stop herself. Beneath the cuff of her dress, the mark on her palm had begun to glow. Soft silver light spilled through the fabric. The messenger's face tightened. "The wards around Blackwood are fading," he continued. "The council says the northern barrier may not hold through the next blood moon." Claire's fingers closed around the edge of the worktable. Across the room, the little boy with the winter cough watched her with wide eyes. She forced herself to breathe slowly. "Why bring this to me?" The messenger reached inside his cloak and placed a small wooden box on the counter. It was plain, dark, and sealed with a strip of silver wax. Claire knew what was inside before he spoke. She knew by the warmth spreading through her palm. "The Alpha King sent no order," the messenger said. "He only asked that this be returned to you." Claire stared at the box for a long moment. Outside, the wind pressed snow against the blue shutters. Inside, every candle flame leaned toward the north. At last, she lifted the lid. The moon ring lay on a bed of black velvet, dim but waiting. Beneath it was a folded note in Adrian Cole's unmistakable hand. Claire did not open it. Not yet. But when the crescent on her palm touched the silver band, the ring flashed once, and a single line appeared across its surface. "The moon has not released either of you." Claire stared at the words glowing across the moon ring until the silver light faded back into the dark metal. The clinic had become so quiet that she could hear the soft ticking of the brass clock above the shelf of medicines. The young messenger remained near the door, careful not to step farther into the room. He looked barely older than the boys who hauled firewood through Frost Hollow, but the worry in his face belonged to someone who had seen too much uncertainty. Claire lifted the folded note from the velvet-lined box. Her name was written on the outside in Adrian's familiar hand. Not Lady Claire. Not Luna. Just Claire. For a moment, she could not bring herself to open it. 3 years had passed since she left Blackwood Citadel in the snow, yet one look at those letters brought back the great hall with cruel clarity. The candles dimming. The court holding its breath. Adrian standing before her with the moon ring in his hand and doubt in his eyes. She had spent 3 years building a life where no one could take her peace away with a single sentence. She had learned which roof leaked after heavy snow, which patients pretended they were not lonely, and which children needed stories before they would drink bitter medicine. She had made Frost Hollow home with her own hands. But the ring on the counter seemed to carry the weight of a door she had closed and never truly locked. Claire unfolded the note. There were no formal greetings, no royal seals, no elegant promises. Only 4 lines written in dark ink. I found proof that Victor Hale forged the letter presented on our bonding night. I have spent 3 years gathering every record because you deserve truth before you ever heard my apology. You owe me nothing. The moon ring is yours whether you return or not. Claire read the words twice. Then she looked toward the messenger. Did the Alpha King send this himself? The young man lowered his head. He did, miss. He gave instructions that no guard was to enter your clinic, and no one was to ask you for an answer. Claire's fingers tightened around the note. It was exactly what she had once wished Adrian would understand. That an apology was not a command. That returning something stolen did not make the thief entitled to forgiveness. Yet the knowledge did not soften everything inside her. It only made the old hurt more complicated. How long has he known? She asked. The messenger hesitated. The first proof was found last spring. But the king said one document was not enough to ask you to believe him. He wanted evidence that could stand before the moon court. Claire looked down at the moon ring. The pale silver crescents carved into its surface had begun to glow again, not with the steady warmth she remembered from the bonding ceremony, but with a fragile flicker, like a candle refusing to go out in a draft. The clinic windows rattled as the wind rose outside. Then the ring grew warm against the black velvet. Claire did not touch it at first. The light spread anyway, crossing the counter in a thin silver line. It reached the note in her hand, then curled around the old scar in her palm. Before she could pull away, the room around her blurred. The shelves of herbs faded into shadow. The snowy street beyond the windows disappeared. In their place, she saw the great hall exactly as it had been 3 years ago. But this time, she was not standing beneath the moon arch. She was watching from the edge of the memory. Victor Hale stood near the throne before the ceremony had begun, speaking quietly to Lady Serena Vale. His voice came clearly through the silver light. Once the king doubts her in public, the moon ring will weaken. He will blame himself, and she will leave. By the time he understands, the council will already have the power it needs. Claire's breath caught. Serena's face looked pale in the memory. And if she does not leave? Victor asked. Then we make the court believe she was never worthy to stay. The vision vanished. The clinic returned all at once, warm and still, with the scent of mint and cedar filling the air. Claire stood frozen beside the counter, the note trembling in her hand. Across from her, the messenger had seen the light but not the memory. Miss Bennet, he whispered. What did it show you? Claire closed the box around the moon ring. Her voice was calm when she answered, but the silver crescent on her palm burned brighter than it had in years. It showed me that the night I left was never only about Adrian's mistake. The messenger did not answer at once. Snow tapped softly against the clinic windows, and the little brass clock continued its steady ticking above the medicine shelf as if the whole world had not shifted beneath Claire's feet. At last he looked toward the black velvet box on the counter. The king believed Victor Hale had planned more than one false accusation, he said. That is why he spent so long searching the old records. He wanted to know how deeply the council had been involved before he brought any of it to you. Claire folded Adrian's note along its old creases. She wanted to be angry that it had taken 3 years. She wanted to ask why he had not sent proof the moment he found it. But she understood the difference between a man bringing her a promise and a man bringing her something strong enough to survive the people who would try to tear it apart. And Victor? She asked. The messenger's expression darkened. He is still Chancellor. The court says there is not enough evidence to remove him without a full moon court hearing. Claire let out a breath that trembled despite her effort to stay calm. Of course Victor still held power. Men like him did not build their lives around one lie. They built staircases from them, each false step leading higher until everyone beneath them had forgotten there was solid ground somewhere below. What has Adrian done these last 3 years? She asked before she could stop herself. The messenger blinked, perhaps surprised by the question. He refused every marriage proposal the council placed before him, he said. Lady Serena's family offered an alliance twice. The king declined both times. Claire's eyes lowered to the moon ring. The silver band lay still inside the box, dim except for the faintest glow along its crescent markings. That does not undo what happened. No, miss, the messenger said quietly. He has never said that it does. For a moment, Claire remembered Adrian standing in the snowy courtyard on the morning she left. He had not tried to stop her. He had not followed. At the time, she had told herself it was because he did not care enough. But now she wondered whether he had finally understood that love without choice was only another kind of cage. The thought did not heal her. It only opened the old wound in a different place. A sharp sound came from outside. The clinic bell rang again, this time faster, followed by the rush of hurried footsteps on the porch. Claire looked toward the door. Before she could move, it opened and Mrs. Talbot from the bakery stumbled inside, snow clinging to her apron. Claire, she said, breathless. The lights at the north marker are gone. The room seemed to turn cold. Frost Hollow had 6 old ward markers along the northern ridge, each one built from moonstone and ironwood to keep winter storms from rolling too far into the village. Claire had helped tend them every year. Their glow had always been soft and steady, like distant lanterns beneath the snow. All of them? Claire asked. Mrs. Talbot shook her head. Only the northern one. But people are scared. Claire looked at the messenger. He understood before she spoke. The Blackwood wards are connected to the village markers, he said. If the palace barrier weakens, the smaller wards will feel it first. Claire's palm began to glow again beneath her sleeve. Not bright. Not painful. Just enough to remind her that the moon had not forgotten the promise she had tried to leave behind. She closed the box around the ring and slipped Adrian's note into the pocket of her dress. Then she reached for her green wool cloak hanging beside the door. Tell the king I am not returning for him, she said. The messenger watched her carefully. What should I tell him, then? Claire fastened the cloak at her throat and looked toward the snow-covered road leading north. Tell him I am returning because people need protection. And this time, I will decide what the moon ring means. The northern ward marker stood on a low ridge half a mile beyond Frost Hollow, its moonstone pillar rising from the snow like a pale broken tooth. Claire reached it just before sunset with the young messenger walking several steps behind her and Mrs. Talbot's oldest son carrying a lantern that gave more comfort than light. Wind moved through the pines in long, restless breaths. Below them, the village windows glowed warm against the deepening blue of evening, small squares of gold that made Claire's chest tighten. These were the people she had promised herself she would protect, with or without a crown, with or without anyone's permission. The ward marker had always hummed softly when it was healthy. Tonight, it was silent. A thin crack ran from its carved crescent top to the ironwood base, and frost had gathered inside the split like white ash. Claire removed her glove. The silver crescent in her palm answered at once, brightening beneath the dark sky. The messenger took a careful step closer. The royal healers say the old barriers were linked to the moon ring when the first Luna accepted the bond, he said. Claire kept her eyes on the damaged stone. And what happens if the ring is returned? No one knows, he admitted. Not completely. That was the truth of it. No one had known what her choice would cost when she placed the ring in Adrian's hand. Not Adrian. Not the elders. Not even Claire. The village had simply watched the consequences spread outward, one dimming light at a time. She opened the velvet box she had carried beneath her cloak. The moon ring lay inside, cool and quiet. For 3 years, it had belonged to no one. Or perhaps it had been waiting for someone to understand that belonging could not be demanded. Claire lifted it from the box, holding it above the cracked moonstone. The silver markings on the band began to shine. Light flowed downward in a thin, trembling thread, touching the broken ward. The crack glowed from within, but it did not close. Instead, the cold air around them filled with a low, distant sound, like a bell ringing beneath deep water. Claire felt the message before she understood the words. The ward did not need a Luna who obeyed. It needed a bond freely renewed by two people who chose each other without fear. She pulled her hand back. The light vanished, and the ring went dark again. Mrs. Talbot's son lowered his lantern. Can you fix it? Claire looked down at the village. She could see the roof of her clinic through the trees, the small blue shutters, the chimney sending smoke into the evening air. She had built that life herself. No ancient magic had handed it to her. No king had made it real. Not alone, she said. The messenger's face tightened. Then we need to bring you to Blackwood. Claire turned toward him. No. You need to tell Adrian what the ward showed me. The young man blinked. And you? Claire slipped the moon ring back into its box but did not close the lid. The crescent mark on her palm remained bright, casting a silver glow across the snow. I will come to Blackwood, she said. But I will not come as someone waiting to be chosen. A sudden wind swept over the ridge, carrying the distant sound of horses approaching from the northern road. Claire looked up. Through the falling snow, a black carriage emerged between the pines, its lanterns burning pale silver. There were no royal banners on its doors. No guards rode beside it. Yet Claire knew who had come before the carriage stopped. The black carriage stopped at the foot of the ridge, its wheels half buried in fresh snow. For several seconds, no one stepped out. Then the door opened, and Adrian Cole descended alone into the winter evening. He wore a plain dark coat without a crown, no silver wolf clasp at his throat, no royal guard at his shoulder. Snow settled in his black hair and along the broad line of his shoulders, but he did not brush it away. He looked up at Claire as though the half-mile between them had been longer than 3 years. The young messenger stepped back respectfully. Mrs. Talbot's son lowered his lantern. Claire remained beside the cracked moonstone pillar, one gloved hand wrapped around the velvet box holding the moon ring. Adrian did not come closer until he reached the bottom of the ridge. Then he stopped. I heard the northern marker went dark, he said. His voice was lower than she remembered, roughened by cold and something else. The ring told me you were here. Claire looked down at the faint silver glow beneath her glove. It tells you where I am now? Only when the wards fail, Adrian said. And only when you choose to answer them. There was no command in his tone. No expectation that she would walk toward him because he had arrived. Still, the sight of him standing below her brought back too many memories at once. The great hall. The snow outside Blackwood. His voice calling her name after she had already chosen to leave. Claire took a slow breath. You should not have come without sending word. Adrian nodded once. You are right. The simple answer caught her off guard. He glanced toward the cracked moonstone, then back at her. I did not come to ask you to return. Then why are you here? His silver eyes held hers. Because the ward crisis is not only happening at Blackwood. It is reaching villages that never chose to carry the cost of what I did. The wind moved through the pines, lifting the edge of Claire's green cloak. Adrian continued before she could answer. Victor Hale has called an emergency moon court. He wants the council to take control of every ward in the Northern Territories. He says the kingdom needs a stronger hand before the blood moon. Claire's mouth went dry. And you think he created this crisis? I know he prepared for it. Adrian reached inside his coat and withdrew a small leather folder. He did not offer it to her yet. My investigators found records showing that Victor redirected moonstone shipments for years. He weakened the outer markers slowly, so the court would become afraid enough to give him authority over the old magic. Claire looked toward the broken ward. The frost-filled crack seemed suddenly less like an accident and more like a wound someone had chosen to ignore until it became useful. Why did not you bring this to the moon court yourself? She asked. Adrian's gaze lowered briefly. Because Victor will say I am protecting my throne. And because, after what happened to you, I no longer believe my word should be enough. The honesty in that sentence settled heavily between them. Claire hated that part of her understood it. Hated that regret looked real on him. But she had not spent 3 years rebuilding her life just to let a familiar ache make decisions for her. She removed her glove. The crescent in her palm glowed softly against the falling snow. Then she opened the velvet box and lifted the moon ring into the cold air. The cracked ward answered with a distant, hollow hum. Adrian did not move. The markers showed me something, Claire said. It does not need a Luna who obeys. It needs a bond renewed by two people who choose each other without fear. Adrian's expression changed, not with hope exactly, but with the careful pain of someone afraid to reach for something he had no right to claim. Then I will not ask you to choose me, he said. Not tonight. Not ever, unless that is what you want. Claire searched his face for the man who had once let silence speak in his place. She found him there, changed by guilt but not erased by it. The moon court will listen to me, she said. Not as your Luna. Not as your second chance. As Claire Bennett. Adrian nodded. As Claire Bennett. Behind them, the moonstone marker flashed once, bright enough to turn the snows silver. Then a line of dark smoke appeared beyond the northern trees, curling upward from the direction of Blackwood Citadel. The messenger's face strained of color. The palace wards, he whispered. Claire closed her hand around the moon ring. Adrian looked toward the smoke, then back at her. He did not tell her what to do. He only asked, Will you let me ride beside you? Claire looked at the dark smoke curling above the northern trees, then at the man who had once let her walk away alone. 3 years ago, Adrian would have told her what the kingdom needed and expected her to follow. Tonight, he stood in the snow and waited for her answer. That difference did not erase the past. But it mattered. Claire slipped the moon ring into the velvet box and tucked it beneath her cloak. You may ride beside me, she said. But you do not speak for me at the moon court. Adrian bowed his head once. I will not. The carriage turned north before the last light left the sky. Claire sat across from Adrian, with the young messenger beside the driver and the road disappearing beneath fresh snow. Either of them spoke for the first several miles. The silence was not empty. It held old disappointment, new fear, and every question that had waited 3 winters to be asked. At last, Adrian placed the leather folder on the seat between them. The shipment records are inside, he said. Victor redirected moonstone meant for the border wards to council storehouses. He told the villages their markers were failing from age. Claire did not touch the folder immediately. And Serena? Adrian looked through the rain-streaked window. She accepted Victor's promises because she believed the crown would eventually be hers. But she gave my investigators a signed council ledger 2 days ago. Claire studied him. Why would she help you? Because Victor told her that once the wards failed, no Luna would matter. Only control would. The answer settled over Claire with a cold weight. Lady Serena had wanted power, but even she had not understood how far Victor was willing to go. Outside, Blackwood Citadel rose through the storm, its towers dark against the sky. The silver ward lights along the walls flickered weakly, blinking in and out like exhausted stars. Claire felt the crescent in her palm warm beneath her glove. She remembered arriving there in white ceremonial silk, believing she had been chosen by the moon. Now she returned in a green wool cloak, carrying no crown, no title, and no certainty that anyone inside those walls deserved her trust. The carriage passed through the open gates. The courtyard was crowded with council guards, palace healers, and frightened servants moving quickly between the ward stones. No one cheered when Claire stepped down. No one called her Luna. They only watched. Adrian walked beside her, not ahead of her. At the entrance to the great hall, he stopped. "The court is waiting," he said. Claire looked at the towering doors, the same doors she had walked through after returning the moon ring. Her throat tightened, but she did not let it stop her. "Then let them wait one moment longer." She turned toward Adrian. "Before we go in, I need one answer. Not as a king. Not as a man trying to win me back. As the person who hurt me." Adrian's silver eyes held hers without flinching. "Ask." Claire's hand closed around the velvet box beneath her cloak. "When Victor showed you that letter 3 years ago, why did you believe him before you believed me?" Snow gathered in Adrian's dark hair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked toward the dim ward lights above the gates. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that loving you had made me careless. Afraid that the court would use you to destroy everything I was supposed to protect. And instead of trusting you with the truth, I chose the easier thing. I chose doubt." Claire felt the honesty of it like a bruise being touched. It did not make the wound disappear. But it was the first time he had named it without hiding behind duty. "You were not protecting the kingdom," she said quietly. "You were protecting yourself from being vulnerable." Adrian lowered his head. "Yes." The great doors opened before them. Inside, the moon court waited beneath the same silver arch where Claire had once stood alone. Victor Hale stood near the throne, dressed in dark formal robes, his expression calm and certain. But when he saw Claire enter beside Adrian, his eyes dropped to the velvet box beneath her arm. For the first time, his confidence broke. Claire walked past Adrian and into the center of the hall. "I am here," she said, her voice carrying through every silent corner, "to tell the truth you tried to bury." The great hall had not changed in 3 years. The same black marble floor reflected the candlelight. The same silver moon arch rose behind the throne. The same noble families filled the galleries with faces Claire remembered too well, faces that had watched her return the moon ring and walk away beneath the weight of their silence. But Claire had changed. She no longer stood beneath the arch in a white ceremonial cloak, waiting for someone else to decide whether she belonged. She wore the dark green wool dress from Frost Hollow, with snow still melting along the hem, and carried the velvet box beneath one arm like a truth that had waited too long to be heard. Chancellor Victor Hale stepped forward from the throne with his hands folded behind his back. His dark robes were flawless. His silver hair was neatly combed. His expression held the patient concern of a man accustomed to being believed. "Claire Bennet," he said, "we are relieved you have come. The northern wards are failing, and the moon court must decide whether the old bond can be restored before the blood moon reaches its height." Claire looked around the hall. The elders sat beneath the carved wolf banners. Council members watched from their elevated seats. Lady Serena stood near the far column in a pale gray gown, her face drawn and unreadable. Adrian remained several steps behind Claire, close enough that she knew he was there, far enough that no one could claim he had placed words in her mouth. "The moon court does not need to decide what my bond means," Claire said. Her voice was steady, even as the old room pressed memories against her skin. "It needs to decide why it allowed a lie to stand in this hall for 3 years. A murmur moved through the galleries. Victor's expression barely shifted. "You are speaking of an accusation already under review." "No," Claire replied. "I am speaking of an accusation you created." She placed the velvet box on the stone table at the center of the hall and opened it. The moon ring lay against the black lining, dim at first, then faintly silver as the crescent mark in Claire's palm began to glow. Several elders leaned forward. Victor's eyes fixed on the ring. 3 years ago, Claire continued, you brought the Alpha King a letter claiming my father had betrayed the crown. You knew the court would doubt me because I came from Frost Hollow and because I had no family name powerful enough to protect me. Victor gave a quiet, regretful sigh. This is a painful misunderstanding. Then explain the shipment ledgers, Adrian said from behind her. His voice was calm, but it carried through the hall. He did not move toward the throne. He did not take Claire's place. He only set the leather folder on the table beside the ring. Explain why moonstone intended for the northern ward markers was redirected to council storehouses under your private seal. Victor's gaze turned cold. A king who has failed his Luna will grasp at anything that shifts blame away from himself. Adrian lowered his head once. I failed her. That is true. But my failure does not make your lies innocent. The hall went silent. Claire looked at Adrian for only a moment. He had not defended himself. He had not made his regret into a shield. Then Serena stepped from the shadows, holding a second ledger close to her chest. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I signed the council record, she said. Victor told me the moonstone was being held for emergency repairs. He said the wards had to weaken before the court would accept stronger control. Victor turned toward her, and something sharp passed across his face. Serena did not step back. I wanted the crown, she continued. But I did not know he meant to put every village at risk. Claire felt the moon ring warm inside the box. Silver light spread across the table, flowing over the ledgers and touching the old marble floor. The ward crest above the throne flickered once. Then the ring lifted slightly from the velvet, turning until its 2 crescent moons faced Claire. A soft voice rose from the silver light, ancient and clear. Truth has been spoken. Choice remains. Every eye in the great hall turned toward her. Victor's certainty finally broke. And Claire understood that the court was no longer waiting to judge her. It was waiting to see what she would choose. The ancient voice faded, but its final words remained in the great hall like moonlight after a storm. Choice remains. Claire stood before the open velvet box while the moon ring hovered above it, turning slowly in the silver air. Every face in the court waited for her. The elders who had watched her leave. The nobles who had whispered that a healer from Frost Hollow could never carry a crown. The council members who had trusted Victor Hale because his lies had always sounded like concern. And Adrian, standing behind her with no command in his eyes, only the quiet understanding that whatever happened next belonged to her. Victor was the first to speak. This is madness, he said. The careful smoothness had gone from his voice. The wards are failing. The kingdom needs certainty, not wounded pride dressed as justice. Claire turned toward him. You call it wounded pride because you never understood what you took from me. Victor's gaze sharpened. I took nothing from you. You took my name and placed suspicion around it. You used a false letter because you knew this court would find it easier to believe a lie about a village healer than the truth about one of its own. Claire's voice did not shake. And you were right about one thing. The kingdom needs certainty. It needs to know that no one, not a chancellor, not a council, and not even an alpha king, can decide a woman's worth without her voice being heard. The hall fell silent again. One of the elder counselors rose slowly from his seat. He looked at the ledgers, then at Victor. Chancellor Hale, he said, until the Moon Court completes its inquiry, you will surrender your seal and leave this hall under guard. Victor looked toward the galleries as if searching for someone who might defend him. No one did. The guards approached with solemn faces, not harsh or hurried, and Victor's shoulders stiffened as they escorted him toward the doors. He paused once, glancing back at Claire. You think this ends with me? He said. The wards were built on older promises than yours. Claire met his eyes. Then we will face those promises in the light. When the doors closed behind him, the great hall seemed to release a breath. Lady Serena stepped forward and placed her signed ledger on the table beside the other evidence. I will testify, she said quietly. Claire nodded once. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of accountability. The moon ring lowered into Claire's open palm. Its silver warmth spread across her skin, but she did not put it on. Instead, she turned to Adrian. He looked at the ring, then at her face. I will not ask you to wear it, he said. I will not ask you to forgive me because the wards need us or because the court is watching. I failed you when you needed trust more than ceremony. I cannot undo that night. But I can spend every day after it proving that I understand what it cost you. Claire listened to the words without letting them decide for her. Then she looked around the hall, at the old throne, the dim ward crest, and the people who had once watched her stand alone. I will help restore the wards, she said. But I will not return to this palace as Luna until this kingdom changes. She lifted the ring slightly. There will be a healer's council with equal standing before the Moon Court. Every accusation must be heard by an independent witness. And no woman will ever be asked to surrender her dignity to prove she deserves protection. Adrian bowed his head. It will be done. Claire studied him for one long moment. Then she slid the moon ring onto her finger, not as a surrender, not as a reward, but as her own decision. Silver light surged through the great hall, climbing the pillars, filling the old ward crest, and racing beyond the palace toward the snow-covered villages of the north. Outside, the ward lights awakened one by one. But high above the black windows, a thin dark fracture appeared across the full moon. Claire felt the ring grow warm against her hand as an ancient whisper moved through the hall. The bond is restored. Now the kingdom must survive what it has awakened.